Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. We apologize for not being in class last week. Um, our we were away doing other productive things. I think Aaron was guest hosting Jimmy Dore, and I have just been publishing a ton of incredible material at the Grayzone. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey Max, hey everybody. Yeah, you have been publishing some great stuff. One of, at least one of which we're going to talk about today, this new APAC expose.
Yeah, we did that. We have an incredible 30-minute documentary by Oscar Leon on the Ecuadorian president, Daniel Noboa, who is up for election this Sunday. Possibly will steal the election. Uh, might try to talk about that at the end if possible. It's a huge election there. We have piece by Wyatt Reed on the Israeli fraudster who was supposed to be one of the heroes of October 7th, who said he rescued 750 Israelis and was the star of Sheryl Sandberg's hoax documentary, exposed as a complete fraud in a Israeli media report that was never aired because they can't tell the public the truth about October 7th. We've got piece on Israeli intelligence infiltrating Meta. We've got a lot up on the site. So, yeah, we've been working hard despite not being there for the live stream. So, we're going to try to pick up the slack this week with as much as we can. Obviously, a lot of things happened. This being probably the least of them, but someone asks if we watched the Douglas Murray Dave Smith discussion on Rogan. I see everyone talking about it. I didn't watch it, probably won't watch it. I just can't stand Douglas Murray. If I were invited to that debate, Douglas Murray would be he would just be like a buffer zone. He wouldn't even be there. But I don't, for some reason, get invited to do these debates. And I hope Dave Smith did well. I can't imagine it would be that hard to take on Douglas Murray. The only thing I've seen reviews of it, people saying, Douglas Murray just appealed to expertise and claimed to be some kind of an expert, where Dave Smith is just a comedian. Douglas Murray's not an expert. He's an agent. He's just an agent of Israeli influence. He wrote a book called Why We Need Neoconservatism. I don't know. He wouldn't be taken seriously if he wasn't astroturfed by a foreign apartheid state's tentacles in the UK. That's my view. There aren't really any real pro-Israel experts. They don't exist. That's why politicians have to take over university departments on their behalf. And they're ousting like Jewish scholars of anti-Semitism and Holocaust studies because they're not Zionist enough. Anyway, that it's good there is a debate. Rogan, Aaron, it seems like Rogan only will platform people who supported Trump or who are on the right on this. And Dave Smith, I think he supported Trump.
I don't know what Joe Rogan's criteria is, but he seems to have like a circle of people who he kind of goes back to and relies on, and obviously he likes Dave Smith. But yeah, it'd be good if Doug. I mean, I know that Glenn Greenwald, for example, offered to debate Doug Murray early on after October 7th, and Doug Murray agreed to come on his show and then ghosted him. So it just sounds like Douglas Murray, and then like he spent the first, from what I've heard, he spent the first like part of the show just talking about how it's so important to interview actual experts, and he like tried to like impugn Dave Smith because Dave Smith hasn't visited Palestine, as if you need to go to Palestine to oppose the mass murder of people there. Like, I've never been to a concentration camp, but I know the concentration camps are bad. It's just, and of course, Douglas Murray, how did he go to Gaza? He went there embedding with the Israeli genocidal military. So you want us to be impressed that you were a propagandist as an army was carrying out mass murder? Is it that somehow gives them credentials? So yeah, it seems like Douglas Murray just wants people to be impressed with his posh British accent, and he certainly does not want to debate people who've actually studied this issue for a very, very long time. But from everything I heard, Dave Smith did well, and it's telling that these are one of the few platforms that there are for actual debates on this issue, which is on the Joe Rogan show.
Yeah. Or you debated Eli Lake in New York on Ukraine.
That's true. I recently did. I did. Yeah. And
I
that was
heard
a
it
good
didn't
debate.
go well for him. There was like a lot of just like egg splattered all over the place, shells.
I think to take the position of arguing in favor of the proxy war, like now, 3 years in, after hundreds of thousands of dead and all the revelations that have come out about lost blocked peace opportunities and all the other things that were obvious to us from the start. I just think that's a very tough hand to be dealt. But some people are still doubling down on it. But yeah, Douglas Murray, complete fraud, lifelong, a career of getting everything wrong. He, like, what was the name of his book? Why We Need Neoconservatism.
Yeah.
He actually wrote that book, and yet, why are people on the right then taking him seriously? If he's the author of, I thought people in the Trump camp are supposed to be against neocons now, so they got to put their house in order.
I'll play one clip of Douglas Murray since we're talking about him. That's like my favorite clip of him. I mean, this is just like what we're dealing with here. A total this is a neocon.
If this wild lack of empathy for the state of Israel means anything, you've got to come back to this primordial triple standard. And we know it can come from anywhere, you know, and that anti-Semitism is a shape-shifting virus, can come from left or right, can come from everywhere at the same time. I think the one of the things that's interesting about the movement of some people on the right against Israel and playing around with anti-Semitic tropes for sure, in a way which you could predict but maybe not expect, is that they seem to think that there's something strange. I get this a bit against my...
Actually, this goes on forever, but he basically says a whole bunch of nothing, but he postures like an intellectual, and he has two buttons open on his shirt and seems sort of like, he could be a stylish, kind of looks like vaguely styled after Martin Amis or Claude Coburn or, someone more from the left, but there's nothing there except Zionist talking points and posturing before Ben Shapiro. And then at the end, he basically says, without Israel, there's no civilization.
The whole tree that we're on, and Western civilization would die. So I regard the existential threat against the Jewish people to not just be about the Jewish people. It matters deeply to me that it is about the Jewish people. But it also matters to me because it's about America. Could America survive if the Jewish people were no more on its watch, or everybody was forcibly deported from the Holy Land? Come on. Of course not. Could the isolationists bear the repercussions of that across the Middle East and elsewhere? Of course not.
So basically he's saying the U.S. could not survive without Israel, and that's why we have to fight for it. The West cannot do without Israel. Israel is such an asset and such a boon. And that's what we're dealing with. That's like the main pro-Israel intellectual. Like that is the man in the English language who Zionists look up to as their premier intellectual. And the greatest president ever for the Zionist movement is currently in office. Aaron, you got to get off the Jimmy Dore Slack.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm joking. The greatest president for Israel is currently in office, and he even applied 18% tariffs to Israel, sending shockwaves through the Israeli Foreign Ministry. He threatened the entire world with economic warfare and threatened to probably triple or quadruple the price of the butt plugs sold by Shmuley Botiuk's daughter, since they're probably made in China, along with most other goods sold in the souvenir shop of Trump Tower, and basically ended the era of globalization. Donald Trump's tariffs. I don't think we can avoid talking about it, although we don't often do economics on this show. I think this announcement by Donald Trump, which came without committees, without congressional involvement, was unilateral and came sort of by surprise. But if you've been following what Trump has been saying since the 1980s and 90s, not terribly surprising that he would do it, and is actually in line with the trajectory of American monetary policy since the first Trump era. And there's a through line in the Biden era. Biden had some protectionist policies as well. It all relates to China, as well as to the unsustainable nature of the US economy and globalization. I assume you agree, Aaron. So I think I'm speaking for both of us that corporate-led globalization, we both see it as terrible for this country. I mean, I watched what it did in the 90s. I was against NAFTA when I was like a teenager because it was just so obvious that we were shipping millions of jobs away that probably wouldn't come back, and it would destroy millions of lives. It would lead to some kind of crisis, which became like the opioid crisis, also the border crisis. And I saw how it destroyed the lives of Mexicans. The first article I ever wrote, ever as a journalist, which was for Salon.com, was about the serial killing of women in Ciudad Juarez. And they were all women who had come from the south of Mexico, who were poor, from a rural economy that was destroyed by NAFTA. And they were working in the auto parts manufacturing plants that had moved across the border from El Paso and elsewhere. And they were nameless and faceless, and they were just winding up in mass graves. And that was the first article I wrote back in, I think it was 2001 or 2002. So it's bad for Mexico, for 2/3 of Mexico. It's good for the elite. Corporate America made this decision without much input from the public. At least Congress voted on it. Members of Congress were bribed. It barely passed. And, here we are 40 years later, 30 years later, and, the U.S. depends on supply chains from abroad for essential goods. That's not very good for the U.S. The balance of payments is extremely bad. The deficit is unsustainable. And Donald Trump decides to announce tariffs against the entire world based on a haphazard mathematical formula. And it lasted about a week after sending panic through the capitalist class because stocks started to plunge. I mean, the first in the stock markets, S&P 500 going down, this was inevitable. I think Trump and Howard Lutnick, who was involved in setting that policy, Howard Lutnick being a bond guy, Besant, the Treasury Secretary, they knew that they could do this as long as they were able to lower Treasury yields. But the people who depend on the stock market, that part of the capitalist class, they were freaking out. And one of them is someone who predicted that Donald Trump would be the greatest president ever for the business community, but also who supported Donald Trump after being a Democrat because Donald Trump was going to criminalize Palestine solidarity activism. And that's Bill Ackman. This is Bill Ackman after Trump was elected in December. The business community is giddy with excitement about the Trump administration. I'm hearing this from everyone. Business leaders are becoming more confident about the country and the economy. They'll be making more investments, which will drive the economy and the stock market, reducing the cost of capital and bolstering confidence further, catalyzing investment and more growth in a self-reinforcing virtuous cycle. It sounds like paradise. Then Trump announces the tariffs. Tariffs being kind of like he kind of just announces them out of nowhere with one of his textbook Trump charts. April 3rd of this year, Bill Ackman. Sometimes the best strategy in a negotiation is convincing the other side that you are crazy. Remember, this is the Bill Ackman who drove the ouster of Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, because she would not criminalize the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. And he elicited promises from the Trump administration that they would just crush the Ivy League schools unless they would do his bidding and the bidding of other Zionist donors on criminalizing Palestine. So now he's still trying to rationalize what Trump did. Stocks are tumbling. Trump won't back down. April 6th, Bill Ackman finally calls for a ceasefire. There's time for a ceasefire before millions of people get hurt. I looked at that and I was like, wait, is he calling for a ceasefire in Palestine where the Holocaust is happening? No, because Bill Ackman actually enjoys that. And his wife gifted Jeffrey Epstein a orb, his Israeli wife, Neri Oxman, who plagiarized her own PhD thesis, gave Jeffrey Epstein an orb in exchange for a large donation to her institute at MIT. Bill Ackman is a major Zionist donor. He's not calling for a ceasefire in Palestine. He's calling for a ceasefire on the tariffs because this concerns his own money and he's losing tons of money. Billionaires were losing billions. Trump had actually, it seemed like he'd taken on the capitalist class in order to bring manufacturing back to the US and tank the World Trade Organization. Then Trump starts to capitulate. He looks at the numbers. The numbers, these are numbers I think he and Besant, who by the way was George Soros's money manager, and Howard Lutnick didn't expect. This is Arnaud Bertrand looking at, these were the numbers 2 days after Bill Ackman called for a ceasefire. Stocks down, yields surging, meaning treasury yields. The dollar is down. Arnaud Bertrand comments on a lot of economic issues. Stocks down, so savings are getting crushed. Bond yields surging, so America needs to pay more interest on its debt. Dollar down, so everything the U.S. buys abroad is more expensive. Massive tariffs, which is a tax on working class Americans, eating away at their spending power, which was already eroded by inflation. Inflation is still coming. American companies see surging cost and more difficulty doing business abroad with retaliatory measures and boycotts. All for what? So Americans can start making socks instead of Bangladeshi workers, so the US government can raise more money to fund an already insanely bloated military industrial complex. Absolutely senseless. I don't agree with everything he said. I think there were some industries that would benefit from tariffs. For example, the fishing industry in what used to be known as the Gulf of Mexico. The auto industry, the United Auto Workers endorsed the tariffs. But the point is taken. Trump was destroying the economy. And the key thing there was that treasury yields were going up to 4.5%. And they wanted to keep them below 4. Now, normally when you do tariffs, like in 2018 when Trump did it, bonds, investors seek haven in bonds because they're more stable, and then the yields go down. But the so-called bond vigilantes, who could have been in China because China owns a lot of treasury bonds, a lot of treasury notes, decided to flee, to abandon bonds, abandoning US bonds as a way of sending a message that you have to abandon this policy. And so Trump capitulated. And he also capitulated because he said he heard Jamie Dimon, who's basically like JP Morgan, financial criminal, walking the streets who said this was going to lead to a recession. So he wasn't listening to Main Street. He was waiting for Wall Street to tell him that this was unacceptable, along with Bill Ackman. Here's Charlie Gasparino on Fox.
Well, I mean, because of the mixed messaging, how can you doubt them? I mean, let's be clear what happened. Who capitulated here and why? And I don't want to say this because I'm a patriot. I'm an American. But it is the White House who capitulated based on everything I hear and all my sources. And the reason why is because of the bond market and what happened last night. Bessent knows this better than anybody. When you have yields on the 10-year rising to 5%, stuff starts shutting down. When you have the lending market screwed up. By the way, who was dumping the bonds? Somebody asked him if it was China, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't. It was Japan. While he was negotiating with Japan, according to my sources, who are running major money management firms that are involved in the bond market, without giving up names, Japan was dumping bonds because they believed this was not a great place to do business. That forced their hands. Now, what you can say, I think, legitimately here, is Trump decided to take the win. And here's why. There was overwhelmingly,
the win
deal potential here among the entire world, except for maybe China, right? Everybody really wanted something. So he did take the win, but make no mistake about it. Peter Navarro was talking as of yesterday about not taking the win, and now they did. And it's all because of the bond market. I want to point out.
I mean, and that's a key point. Peter Navarro, who Elon Musk, who was an opponent of the policy, was calling Peter Retardo, actually wanted to restructure the American economy along protectionist lines and keep this going until companies were forced to come back and provide jobs. I don't know if they were there, or at least bring their companies back to the US and bring the supply chains into American borders. And Trump supposedly took the win. I don't know what win he's talking about there.
The win he's talking about is that countries were lining up to negotiate with Trump.
Yeah, that's what Trump said.
That's what Fox News is trying to say is the win.
Yeah. Trump said 75 countries came to negotiate with him, and he was asked to produce a list of which 75 countries had come to, as he said, kiss his ass. And he refuses to produce the list. He won't say who is coming to the table to whimper. And I'm sure some countries are, and they're going to offer all kinds of incentives, bribes to the Trump family. That's another reason I think Trump is doing this. They're going to hire tons of lobbyists. This is going to would be a boon for K Street, but now lobbyists are all confused. So it doesn't. I don't see where the win is. And then you have all of these Trump cultists who have had to say that this is the art of the deal. Somehow Trump scored some giant victory here. The stock market continues to tank. All three indexes ended on a loss yesterday. Inflation is coming. He just stopped the process of possibly a sovereign debt crisis and a default on the U.S. credit. But this was brilliantly executed by the real Donald Trump. Textbook Art of the Deal by Bill Ackman. I mean, that's what they all have to say. So hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't buy this line coming out of the White House that all of a sudden they really care about the average worker. Like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who's a hedge fund guy, is sounding an awful lot like Bernie Sanders. So I want to play a couple of his clips. This is what he said just the other day.
For the last 4 decades, basically since I began my career in Wall Street has grown wealthier than ever before, and it can continue to grow and do well. But for the next 4 years, the Trump agenda is focused on Main Street. It's Main Street's turn. It's Main Street's turn to hire workers. It's Main Street's turn to drive investment. And it's Main Street's turn to restore the American dream.
I mean, so this guy coming from Wall Street all of a sudden is like, have all these guys just had epiphanies where all of a sudden now they want to serve Main Street and not Wall Street? And here's more about him talking to Tucker Carlson.
The distribution of equities across households, the top 10% of Americans own 88% of equities, 88% of the stock market. The next 40% owns 12% of the stock market. The bottom 50 has debt. They have credit card bills, they rent their homes, they have auto loans, and we've got to give them some relief. That I was struck by the statistic from last year.
That's the message right there. Just as a bystander, I'm like, wow, okay.
All right, or that I like the examples, and I was really struck by two different statistics last year. Summer of 2024, Americans took more European vacations than they had in history. Summer of 2024, more Americans were using food banks than they ever have in history. I went into two food banks near my hometown to ask, what's the story? And they said, it really takes, for a lot of people, it's a loss of dignity to walk in a food bank.
Of course.
But they were seeing a new phenomenon, that it wasn't their traditional clientele. It wasn't people who'd lost their homes. It wasn't people out on the street. These were working families who could no longer, $100 at the grocery store, that basket of groceries every week, they were missing 5, 6, 7 things, and they were coming to the food bank to top up. So that's not a great America. Record European vacation, record food banks.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great, but what are you doing for people who rely on food banks? The price of eggs right now is still very high. The Republicans just passed a budget that wants to cut money from Medicaid, so they want to make basically already a struggling populace even more vulnerable by taking away the meager benefits that some working people already have, while also making permanent their tax cuts, which favor the ultra wealthy. So, and that's the theory of someone like Richard Wolff, the economist Richard Wolff, who says the reason one of Trump's main motivations in these tariffs is he can raise some short-term revenue that could justify him going to the public and say, this is why we can afford to cut these taxes now, because look, I raised this money from tariffs. So I just don't see them. I mean, it's nice rhetoric. We want to help Main Street, not Wall Street, but what are they actually doing policy-wise for that? And yeah. I mean, could targeted tariffs serve that goal? Yeah, but this wasn't targeted. This was just across the board, and then immediately caving as soon as some of his top donors rebelled.
He claimed that he was raising $6 trillion in revenue. The real number might be closer to $2 trillion if he had held on. And then he's going to lose all of that to use this by using this to pay for a giant tax cut for the rich. And how is that going to help Main Street? It's ridiculous. Paying for a tax cut for the rich. It was the Bush tax cuts, by the way, that reversed the U.S. surplus that could have been used to pay down Social Security, which is now a crisis that Elon Musk has been called in to fix. It's one of the few things that actually works in this country. And
she calls it the biggest Ponzi scheme in history.
Yeah. And then you have the Pentagon budget, which we'll talk about later, and entitlements. And they're attacking entitlements. They're firing masses of government workers, but they're attacking entitlements. How's that going to help Main Street? So they're basically trying to cut everything they can without going after the key interests that propelled Donald Trump's political career and the careers of everyone around him. This is a cabinet, and the Democrats are controlled by billionaires too, but this cabinet has the most billionaires of any administration in U.S. history.
Even more than Trump's first term? Because I thought Trump's first term set the record for that.
I'm pretty sure this is a record breaker, but maybe I'm wrong. It's up there. So it's laughable. Where is it heading? Where is this heading? Well, all the tariffs have been dropped for 90 days. They got the Bill Ackman ceasefire, except against China, which was the ultimate target here. I mean, this really is about China. And as is the $1 trillion Pentagon budget, as is the authorization of the B-47 stealth bomber, the most expensive weapons platform in history. It's all about war with China. And so Trump is now currently in a trade war with China. Just about 72 hours ago, this is Trump's message about the tariffs.
Because I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir. Because I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass.
I just want to hear it again. I can't
They are
believe
dying to
the
make a deal.
president said
Please,
that.
please, sir, make a deal.
I mean, it's kind of funny. He's entertaining the National Republican Congressional Committee, like one of the arms of the Republican Party, black tie dinner. He went on forever. But one country that isn't kissing his ass right now is China. Trump rose tariffs. He jacked up tariffs on China to 104%, expecting them to stand down. And China didn't. What did China do? It retaliated, and the retaliation is going to continue for some time. China raised tariffs to 125% on US goods. Now, of course, the US imports a lot more from China than China imports from the US. But what we're looking at is a delinking here, something that's been expected for some time, and which the new Cold War imposed on China was intended to trigger. Given that U.S. exports to China already have no market acceptability under the current tariff rates, if the U.S. further imposes additional tariffs on Chinese goods, China will simply ignore them, said the Custom Tariff Commission of the State Council, the country's cabinet. Global Times, which is sort of the house organ newspaper of the Communist Party of China, one of the, in the English language organ, one of the most influential English language papers coming out of China, which speaks for the leadership in many ways, and which also influences the leadership. China's fight to the end is backed by strong confidence. This is a Global Times editorial, basically declaring China, this is a matter of national pride, and China will not back down. So I don't know how this ends up, but the sense I'm getting is if China manages to stand down the United States, the US will respond with the one thing it has left, which is force. And it already is engaged in gunboat diplomacy against China. In the Western Hemisphere, it sent Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to Panama to threaten China.
President Molino's decision to withdraw from the Belt and Road Initiative reflects his government's clear understanding of China and the threat it poses. I want to be very clear. China did not build this canal. China does not operate this canal. And China will not weaponize this canal. Together with Panama in the lead, we will keep the canal secure and available for all nations through the deterrent power of the strongest, most effective, and most lethal fighting force in the world. We will do this in partnership with Panama. Together, we will take back the Panama Canal from China's influence. And we will do this along with other capable, like-minded allies and partners. This is what peace through strength looks like.
Peace through strength. What Pete Hegseth is referring to is the U.S. strong-arming Hutchinson Limited, the holding company belonging to a Hong Kong-based businessman who owns some of the main ports on the Panama Canal, strong-arming them out of China and threatening Panama until they withdrew from the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And who are they going to hand over those ports to? Is it going to be just to the American people, to just American companies? No, it's to BlackRock, which has a giant office in Shanghai. BlackRock, which is shafting the American people. So this is basically a win for BlackRock, but it's also a direct military threat against China. I mean, they're using the threat of lethal violence to force China economically out of a bilateral, consensual economic partnership with a country, a sovereign country in the Western Hemisphere, which the US previously attacked and invaded and left like neighborhoods in Panama City in ashes in 1990 as a pilot program for the first Gulf War, where the B-2 was first tested. So all of this language and this economic warfare, to me, is extremely dangerous because it's leading us towards real warfare with China. And this is what I call the art of the schlemiel, because it's not a war that the US wants to fight. And it will plunge the US system, political system and economic system, into existential doom.
And I don't remember, I'm not asking this rhetorically. Did Trump campaign on this? About taking back the Panama? No, I'm serious. I actually don't remember. Like, did he mention this during the campaign, the Panama Canal? I don't remember it, but maybe I missed it.
I believe he mentioned it. I remember him saying we're going to get Greenland back. But the Panama Canal has been a fixation of a part of the nationalist right since Reagan's second campaign for office in 1980, when Reagan, his first victory, he was campaigning on not giving the canal to Panama. And it was considered sort of like a loss for the US to let Panama have a canal under its control on its own territory. But the US was like basically in charge of Panama's dollarized economy, and still is. Panama is still in many ways a US vassal state with a pro-US administration, with the US getting massive profits from the Panama Canal. Where could that lead if the US is going to try to take the Panama Canal by force? It provides more momentum to the push to build another canal in Nicaragua, a country that is sanctioned by the United States and has no future without China. So the US could actually could get a much worse outcome if that took place. And I think they could like attack Nicaragua if they went ahead with that. It's a stalled project. But anyway, I just wanted to make the overall point that the Trump administration has finally pivoted to Asia in this term, and it's doing so at the very same moment that it is placing Iran in its crosshairs and failing. We can talk about it later. Failing in its negotiations to end the Ukraine proxy war. Everything they're doing right now is war abroad, and at home it's all emergency, placing the United States in a state of emergency in order to advance a program without the courts intervening. So I don't know, that could segue to Netanyahu meeting with Trump, kind of rushing to Washington last minute, passing over European borders, crossing through Hungary, over European airspace with an ICC warrant over his head, with no one doing anything. A complete insult to this so-called, whatever's left of the rules-based order. And he arrives in Washington with a very clear agenda. Aaron, what were your thoughts on the meeting?
Well, I was particularly struck by Trump endorsing the extremist ultra-right Israeli perspective that Israel should never have withdrawn its settlers from the Gaza Strip. He talked about Israel once owning the Gaza Strip and giving it up foolishly. It was like he said it was a mistake for Israel to withdraw its settlers from the Gaza Strip, which is like that's like the ultra extreme fringe view in an already extremist Israeli society. Like
Yeah.
Ariel Sharon gave up the Gaza Strip because, as one of his advisors explained, what was his name, Dov Wiseglass, he said that we wanted to put formaldehyde on the so-called peace process to stop all this talk about a Palestinian state. So if we pull out the settlers from Gaza and just put them all in the West Bank, they'll basically freeze the peace process and stop all these pesky demands for a Palestinian homeland. So that's so Trump is saying that was too generous to Palestinians to basically remove the illegal settlers from Gaza. And he basically, so he's showing that he's accepting the ultra extreme perspective of an already extremist Israeli society. And then, Netanyahu then, took Trump's lead or cue and just lied through his teeth and said that it's not us that locks in the Palestinians. They should be free to go wherever they want. And by that, he means they should be ethnically cleansed. And of course, it's his government that's put Gaza under siege for 20 years and counting. And
Trump tossed to Netanyahu here and just said, like, let's have the expert explain why Gaza's in the situation it's in.
Give people a choice. Gaza
Terrible volume.
And any other place, Gazans were closed in. And any other place, including in arenas of battle, I mean, whether it's Ukraine or Syria or any other place, people could leave. Gaza was the only place where they locked them in. We didn't lock them in. They're locked in. And what is wrong with giving people a choice? Give people a choice.
It sounds good. They're just locked in, and we didn't do it. He just says we didn't do it. He just openly lies. And so why don't we just give them a choice? And I was struck out by I watched the whole press conference. Not one reporter asked a critical question of Netanyahu. Not one. If anything, they asked him about the hostages, but not the 2 million hostages in the Gaza Strip. But why would they give him a choice to leave? Why is this happening? It speaks to the core logic of Zionism, which is that there can't be a Jewish state in the heart of the Arab Middle East without it committing ethnic cleansing in order to preserve its ethno-religious purity and the demographic advantage which it has basically lost over Palestinians. That's why Gaza exists in the first place. It's just a human warehouse for surplus humanity that can't be inside Israeli-controlled territory. But now they want to actually annex parts of Gaza, create buffer zones, which means destroying entire cities and giving them a choice to leave in order to put what you said is like always been the most extreme solution that we always thought was the provenance of settlers and Kahanists into the mainstream. And that's what Trump has done. He's made population transfer, ethnic cleansing mainstream.
The one critical question I heard, somewhat critical question, if you can call it that, was to Trump when he was asked, do you think blocking all humanitarian aid is an effective strategy? Not like, do you think it's a legal strategy, a moral one, which of course it's not effective. And of course, Trump just ignored that question and no one asked him a follow-up. So that was the one mention that I heard in the whole time of the fact that Israel is still putting Gaza under a medieval siege, blocking everything from coming in. And the U.S. media just treats that as normal, just like they treat the daily slaughter of civilians, including so many children every single day that we can all see on our social media feeds, as totally routine.
Yeah. It's there is nothing holding Israel back from being what it truly is, from showing the world what it truly is, which is what we see in Gaza. The United States is not even pretending anymore that Israel should allow in humanitarian aid, or the Biden administration declared that Rafah is a red line before it allowed Israel to enter Rafah. Blinken was pretending to care about the humanitarian situation of Palestinians. There were fake displays of outrage over the World Central Kitchen killing, in which, an American was killed and international aid workers were deliberately assassinated. Now there's just nothing. the execution of 15 aid workers, medics in Gaza, which turned out to be an on-camera execution because one of their iPhones was found despite the Israeli soldiers' attempts to bring in a bulldozer and bury the ambulances. That was all dismissed by the Trump State Department as the fault of Hamas, which means go kill everybody you want. 100 or 200 Israeli medics have actually called for the punishment of those soldiers, but nothing from the US administration. So Netanyahu's getting emboldened, and he wants war. He wants Trump to carry out the most important aspect of his agenda, which is war with Iran. I mean, that's what Netanyahu's entire career has been animated by, is his desire for regime change in Iran, for destroying the Iranian state, because it is the one force left in the region which is still sponsoring and supporting resistance against Zionism when the rest of the Arab states have totally capitulated, most recently Syria, which we'll talk about. And here is his chance. Like, the Israelis believe that there's this window that they have right now where Iran can be attacked, where Trump is still popular and strong, and they have him by the short and curlies. So this is the reason that Netanyahu flew in kind of last minute, and he's proposing his solution here.
And of course, we also discussed Iran. Look, we're both united in the goal that Iran does not ever get nuclear weapons. If it could be done diplomatically in a full way, the way it was done in Libya, I think that would be a good thing. But whatever happens, we have to make sure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons.
What does that mean, Aaron? Like the way it was done in Libya?
It means Libya gives up its deterrence, and then the U.S. launches a regime change war, and the president, Gaddafi, gets sodomized. That's the Libyan model. That's what Netanyahu is calling on. And when John Bolton put forward a similar proposal back in 2020, and I believe he was talking about North Korea, this is what Donald Trump said about John Bolton. What would Bolton, one of the dumbest people in Washington, know? Wasn't he the person who so stupidly said on television, Libyan solution, when describing what the U.S. was going to do for North Korea? Okay, so when John Bolton offered the exact same proposal as Netanyahu is doing, Donald Trump called him out and called him one of the dumbest people in Washington. Can you imagine Donald Trump ever even tapping Netanyahu on the wrist for proposing the exact same model when it comes to Iran? No, of course not, because he serves Netanyahu. He serves the Israel lobby. But that's, when Donald Trump felt the freedom to speak, that's what he said about John Bolton and the so-called Libyan model in North Korea. But that's exactly what Netanyahu is pushing for. And to show, again, his deference to Israel, he talked about, yes, like after he announced that there's going to be peace talks with Iran, he also continued to threaten military strikes. And listen to how he refers to Israel and their potential role in a U.S. attack on Iran.
But with Iran, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
Yes.
With Iran,
So Israel will be the leader of any strike on Iran, he blurts out, but then he quickly corrects himself. Nobody leads us. Yeah, actually, I think people do lead you. I think Israel does lead you because you're taking their advice and you're pushing for war with Iran. And I mean, the problem with Trump is you don't know what is going on there. So yes, there are these talks. That's a good thing. Did the Biden administration make a serious effort toward diplomacy with Iran? No, they didn't. They basically adopted the Trump first term policy. So which way is Trump going to go? On the one hand, he sounds like he's following Israel's lead because he's calling them the leader of any potential strike on Iran. But then also he is talking about direct talks, and Steve Witkoff, his top envoy basically for all war-related matters, is going to speak in Oman indirectly with Iranian officials. So it's hard to tell, but if you go by what he says, at least publicly, it looks like right now he's taking Israel's lead, and that doesn't bode very well for the chances of peace.
Well, I love that he's at least acknowledging that Israel is driving this policy, just as Israel's driving the Yemen policy. Israel supplying intelligence on taking out the top missile guy, as Mike Waltz acknowledged. I wonder if Trump even knew about that policy. Israel's driving it. Israel will take the lead. He's also saying that to kind of comfort Americans. Like, don't worry, we're just supporting Israel, and they're our proxy, which really, like, anyone who's paying attention can't possibly believe that. But Trump hasn't put forward the Libya option. I don't know what they're demanding of Iran, but I know what they have demanded in the past under the maximum pressure policy put forward by arch neocon Brian Hook, who was in charge of Trump's policy back in Trump's first term, which led to the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And Brian Hook was on Trump's transition team during his campaign. And that is untenable for Iranians and is a recipe for national suicide. Because not only do they demand that Iran give up its nuclear program, which Iran says it doesn't even have a military or weapons grade nuclear program, but also
U.S. intelligence says the same thing too. They just put out a report saying that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program.
There you go. They also are demanding that Iran give up its ballistic missile program, which is at the heart of its deterrence strategy, its strategic deterrence, as we saw during one of the few times they actually responded to Israeli provocations and unprecedented attacks on their assets and territory. They also are demanding that Iran give up support to Hezbollah and the so-called Houthis, Ansar Allah, and the popular mobilization units. So basically, Iran has to give up its strategic depth. And the whole point of that is just to set the stage for regime change through negotiations. Because then after they do that, they'll fan the flames of some kind of Masa Amini-style color revolution in the heart of Tehran, which was extremely violent. The U.S. media wouldn't report that. They'll send in, dirty warriors, as they did in Syria, Takfiri forces, encircle Iran, and they could set up any pretext for regime change. Iran is not going to be able to accept that in Oman. And what would happen if there was war? I mean, do you think war is possible here, Aaron?
With this group of people, yeah, I think anything is possible. The Trump camp has different people. You have people like Tucker Carlson, and I think JD Vance is probably in this camp too, who don't want these foreign wars on behalf of Israel. But that's not the only people in the Trump camp. You also have fanatical Zionists, and that's who his top donors are. And they do want a war with Iran, I think, and they think they can win. And they've planned for it. Like, Iran does not have nuclear weapons. The U.S. does. And so the U.S. does have some sort of advantage there. And the question is, would they be crazy enough to send ground troops? You never know with these people. You never know with these people. They're obsessed with destroying Iran because Iran acts as a deterrent to U.S.-Israeli hegemony. And when you're a hegemon, you'll do crazy things. Joe Biden was willing to fuel a proxy war. In fact, direct a proxy war, as we recently confirmed for the New York Times, because it was the U.S. military running the proxy war from Germany, and risk nuclear war over it. So just as Biden was willing to risk nuclear war and sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine and Russia, I don't think some people in the Trump camp want to rule out, sacrificing U.S. soldiers for the goal of regime change in Iran. I can't rule that out.
No, we'll talk about this in a second. That's why Mike Waltz is there. That's totally why he's there. And his entire career is the result of Israel lobby sponsorship. And, what I've been hearing in and around the administration is that he has his finger on the trigger, pushing and has almost gotten what he wants, which is a U.S. strike on Iran, that the signals are blinking red. And someone else who I assume is hearing the same thing is someone you mentioned who's like got a little bit better access than I do to Trump's inner circle, Tucker Carlson. I mean, why else would Tucker Carlson have said this if something frightening? We were not on the precipice of something frightening. Whatever you think of tariffs, wrote Tucker, it's clear that now is the worst possible time for the United States to participate in a military strike on Iran. I don't know when a good time would be. We can't afford it. Thousands of Americans would die. We'd lose the war that follows. Nothing would be more destructive to our country. And yet we're closer than ever thanks to unrelenting pressure from neocons, referring to Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, and the CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and many others around Trump. This is suicidal. Anyone advocating for conflict with Iran is not an ally of the United States, but an enemy. Great statement. He leaves out the economic damage. I think the primary damage of any conflict with Iran at this point would be economic, and that Iran would attack the arteries of the global economy, cutting off the Strait of Hormuz, attacking oil installations, including those belonging to the Axis of Assistance, the fake Arab states that are actually just oil companies in disguise. And the global economy would spiral. And it would all be thanks to Trump obeying his master in Tel Aviv. That can't be good for Trump while he's in the midst of a trade war with China and has a global trade war on pause. I mean, it would seem insane, but, never underestimate the art of the schlemiel. So tomorrow's a huge day. That's the meeting with Witkoff and Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, in Oman. I have no idea what's going to take place there, but it's going to be a defining moment.
Yeah. One other problem here is to even make a deal that can save face for Trump. Let's say Trump wants to make a deal, right? Let's just say that. How do you save face for Trump after he walked away from the deal that was already on the table? So basically, how do you because is Iran going to basically cut off ties to Hezbollah or give up its ballistic missiles as like Netanyahu wants? No, right? So basically what you're looking at is basically the same Iran nuclear deal that Trump walked away from. So how do you repackage the exact same Iran nuclear deal while still making it look as if Trump got a win? So if Trump actually wants a deal, they'll have to come up with a way to because obviously Trump's not going to take a deal in which he'll admit that he's just going back to the nuclear deal that he walked away from, that he tore up in his first term. So they're going to have to come up with some kind of creative way to make it look as if Trump's gotten something new. And I just don't know what that exactly is. But that's what is on offer. So Trump walking away from the Iran nuclear deal in his first term has just made it that much more difficult. And then what? And then he has already threatened strikes. He said very clearly that if Iran doesn't make a deal, there will be bombing. There will be bombing on the likes of which we've never seen before. So that's a threat he's made, and he will feel compelled to go through on that threat too if there's no deal. So yeah, these are really, really high stakes, and I just don't know what they can do if Trump is serious about reaching an agreement to make it look as if he actually achieved something.
They're going to target Iranian nuclear sites with bunker busters, with B-2s, and try and confront Iranian air defenses with F-18s. They're not going to be able to suppress Iranian ballistic missile fire and suppress Iran's assets. It will be a bloodbath. I don't know what winning looks like in that scenario. There are hundreds and hundreds of missile silos in the mountains of Iran that the U.S. won't be able to get to. They don't know where they are. And look at what they're doing with Yemen as a perfect example of military buffoonery. The United States has spent at least $1 billion, according to CNN. Corporate media is catching up on this. $1 billion in just a few weeks in restarting their assault on Yemen, Operation Rough Rider, It was named by Pete Hegseth after the colonial fanatic Theodore Roosevelt, I guess. That's my only guess. $1 billion. U.S. munition supplies are being depleted, which is worrying Taiwan. They're supposed to be used to threaten China. And they have achieved no freedom of navigation. According to U.S. intelligence sources who are talking to the media, the most they've taken out is mid-level Houthi or Ansar Allah leaders. They're not achieving anything. They blew up a historic ancient fortress above Sana'a the other day because they're just so short on targets. They blew up a tribal gathering, a majlis of tribal elders, and then told everyone that they were meeting to plan the war. Yeah, we're just going to go with drones hovering over our head during a war. We're all going to go out in a field and stand in a circle, and that's how we're going to meet to plan the war because we're that primitive. The only people who were primitive in this scenario are the Trump cultists who actually believed what Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth told them about that bombing. What that bombing was collateral murder, but we didn't need WikiLeaks to show it to us. We just needed to go to Trump and Pete Hegseth's X accounts. That's how depraved this administration is, but also failed. And Aaron, it looks like they're talking about a ground invasion of Yemen.
There was a report on CNN that, yeah, there's talk of a ground invasion of Yemen. They didn't say with which troops. Like, are they really going to send U.S. troops to Yemen, or are they talking about using like a proxy force from Saudi Arabia or another Gulf monarchy?
Yeah.
That's not clear. But, yeah.
Didn't they already try that?
Well, I mean, Saudi Arabia's invasion was mostly from the air, right? Which was U.S. supported. I don't think there were that many ground troops. There were mercenaries on the ground. I don't think there were that many ground troops. And that's the thing. You're not going to defeat Ansar Allah unless you actually have like a full-on ground invasion. And certainly the Saudis, like however many they sent, mercenaries or otherwise, they tried that for 10 years. Last month was the 10th anniversary of the U.S.-backed Saudi attack on Yemen, and that didn't succeed.
Well, they don't have any men in Saudi Arabia who are going to fight Ansar Allah. They had to recruit mercenaries from Sudan because they just don't have any men. And those guys got wasted in the field. So the U.S. is just offering air support. Maybe they'll bring in some A-10s and try to strafe Houthis and as they arrive in technicals. I don't know what they're going to do. Will they get enough like close Apache helicopter support? I don't know what they're offering them, but there already was a war where the US and UK were supplying air power, just not doing it as directly as they're promising now. But on the ground, the Saudi and Emirati forces were just mercenaries who got smashed like rotten cantaloupes. So,
I mean, like the problem is like the U.S. and Israel just can't negotiate with everyone because they view everyone else as subhuman, and especially people who resist their aggression. They can't be negotiated with because you can't legitimate anyone who dares to resist your aggression. So when Adam Bowler, the Trump hostage envoy, was negotiating with Hamas and called them nice guys and said that the U.S. not an agent of Israel, he had to go because he put Hamas on a somewhat equal footing as the U.S. and Israel. And he even said, we're not an agent of Israel, which you're not allowed to say. And even back when John Kerry under Obama, when he worked out some deal to cooperate with Russia and Syria against ISIS and other sectarian, insurgents, that deal lasted, I don't know, like a few days or a few weeks, because immediately the U.S., elements of the Pentagon that didn't want to deal with Russia and didn't want to deal with Syria because they wanted to continue regime change, they bombed a Syrian military convoy and blew up that agreement. So it just, anyone who tries to negotiate, and of course Obama had the Iran.
They bombed them outside Deir ez-Zor, where they were protecting the city from ISIS. So they allowed ISIS to take a mountain.
Yeah. And then, Obama, even when he negotiated the Iran deal, he didn't fully implement it himself, even though it was his deal. And they talked about how basically it was expendable, that they weren't necessarily going to respect it. And of course, what did Trump do when he came in office? He just tore it up anyway. And Joe Biden, when he had the opportunity to restore the Iran nuclear deal, which was negotiated by the administration he was in, he continued the Trump policy of maximum pressure, which means economic strangulation of Iranian citizens. And of course, what happened when Russia tried to negotiate and tried to get Biden to pressure Ukraine to implement the Minsk Accords? Biden just said, no, let's have a proxy war. So all these people are just reflexively hostile to negotiating, especially with people who dare to resist militarily with armed force, which is supposed to be the monopoly of the U.S. and Israel. And so that's why all these agreements are they're impossible to reach, because the U.S. just can't see anybody as an equal.
And the U.S. system is erratic and unstable. One administration makes a deal, 4 years later, some maniac comes in and rips it up. How can you trust them? Just ask Red Cloud if you can trust the American authorities. So it looks like they only understand force, which is why this war is taking place, why the Houthis took up arms. I mentioned earlier that there was this inertia, this momentum inside the Trump administration for war with Iran. They were finally going to do it. And it's coming from the National Security Council. It's coming from some other key national security positions. And the reality in Washington is personnel is policy. Obviously, there's a structure to the broader policy, the neoliberal capitalist structure and so on. But personnel matters. That's the message that AIPAC sends to its members. I was able to obtain audio from the most recent AIPAC meeting in Washington, a major summit called the 2025 Congressional Summit, from an attendee. And basically what happens at that summit is there are some high-level speeches. Netanyahu spoke. Yair Lapid, who's the sort of de facto head of the Israeli opposition, spoke. And those are public. But then there are all these breakout sessions where AIPAC members, their rank and file of Israel lobbyists, listen to the so-called experts who set the agenda for the Israel lobby, and they hear from AIPAC's leadership. AIPAC's leadership are some of the most influential people in American policymaking, period. But you rarely see them having debates. Like, you're not going to see the CEO of AIPAC debating on Pierce Morgan. You'll see like Shmuley just running his mouth. These guys fly below the radar. They're very slick. They're super influential. You rarely get to hear what they say unless you're an AIPAC member. So I got this audio, put out some audio clips that I think are extremely illustrative of how they do business, but more importantly, how the sausage is currently being made on Iran and Yemen. And the CEO, the new CEO of AIPAC, Elliot Brand, declares that he has been grooming the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, for decades, as well as Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz. And he also mentions Elise Stefanik, who is going to be the UN ambassador. And he says, what do they all have in common? I'll play the audio. It's terrible audio, but I'll play it. What do they all have in common? They all came from Congress. And that's the key that's why AIPAC loves members of Congress going into national security positions. Let's listen to what he says, and then we'll kind of address it.
We may not lobby the executive, but as we were talking about, there was a discussion earlier about Congress being representative to the people. Well, the White House has to be responsive to Congress. And so it's working with, at the time, our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle to apply pressure the way that they know how to an administration, as it will be with this administration. Bob was talking about the people who will get appointed into some of these jobs. Look, at the top level, you talk about Marco Rubio and Elise Stefanik and Michael Waltz. Those three people have something in common. They all serve in Congress. They all have relationships with key AIPAC leaders from their communities. So the lines of communication are good. Should there be something questionable or curious that we need access and the conversation chip. You never know. One of the first candidates I ever met with as an APAC professional when my job was to meet candidates for Congress was a guy named John Ratcliffe. He was challenging a longtime incumbent member of Congress in Dallas. This guy looks like he could win the race. And we go talk to him. He had a good understanding of the issues. And a couple of weeks ago, he took the oath as the CIA director, for crying out loud. This is the guy that they had a chance to speak to. So there are a lot, I won't call them lifelines, but there are lifelines.
So there are lifelines in there. I thought Ratcliffe was the most interesting mention by Brand, because he's basically saying, you know, we got him elected. He owes his career to us. And now we have lines of communication if anything confusing or unusual happens. So if Donald Trump starts negotiating with Iran and Israel, the state of Israel, doesn't like what it's seeing there, Trump is offering Iran what Israel would consider a bad deal, a pro-peace deal. Well, they open up their lines of communication to their assets who owe their careers to AIPAC, which has people in their districts, what Representative Thomas Massey called an AIPAC person in their district. Remember, he was attacked and called a conspiracy theorist for saying that to Tucker Carlson. They call on them, and they call on their contacts in the National Security Council, at the State Department, in the CIA, and they find out what's going on. And AIPAC is traditionally a channel for Israeli intelligence. Remember, I mentioned this in the article that accompanies the video. In 2004, 2005, a major national security espionage scandal erupted in Washington when the FBI arrested a Pentagon researcher named Larry Franklin, who had been feeding classified documents about U.S.-Iran policy to two AIPAC researchers, Keith Weissman and Steve Rosen. And they went to the Israeli embassy and supplied that to Israeli intelligence. So Israel was getting lines of communication there on the Pentagon going to its people. Weissman eventually, I think he got that's not Weissman. Larry Franklin got 9 months in prison for a major act of espionage. And these AIPAC researchers, they just got a slap on the wrist. These were the colleagues of Elliot Brandt. He was there at AIPAC at the time. And Elliot Brandt's predecessor, Howard Kaur, who was CEO of AIPAC in 2004, his office was raided by the FBI. His computer was seized. He was a suspect. That's what AIPAC is. AIPAC is an arm of Israeli intelligence. It was set up by Israeli intelligence as the American Zionist Committee by an Israeli asset in the United States named Isaiah Kennan. If you want to learn more about that, read the work of Grant Smith. He's written books about this. So that's why I think this statement by Elliot Brandt is so significant, and why I think people might even, who are critical of Israel, might even underestimate the power of the lobby, especially in this administration, where these are de facto Israeli assets in there. Where was John Ratcliffe yesterday? I think it was. Right when I dropped this piece, John Ratcliffe was meeting with Netanyahu and the Mossad director in Jerusalem. This is right upon Netanyahu's arrival. There he is with David Barnea, the Mossad director, and Netanyahu. I don't know if he got a golden pager or just a, special back channel. But there it is. I mean, there are many, many pictures of John Ratcliffe throughout his career meeting with Israeli officials and Israel lobbyists, and it's not exceptional in Congress. What's exceptional is if someone doesn't have an AIPAC handler like Thomas Massey and they manage to survive. So we have other audio up there. It's on YouTube. It's on the Grayzone site from other figures. Dana Strahl, who, Aaron, you've
Well, that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that that's my favorite part of your piece, on top of the leaked audio, is the extensive appearance of Dana Stroul, who's now with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, right? Is that the think tank she's with, the neocon think tank?
Yeah. It was founded originally out of AIPAC.
Yeah, and who is she? She's the former senior Biden official in the Pentagon for the Middle East, and before that was the co-chair of a congressional panel on Syria. And she's the one who's in that clip that we've played so many times, where she's bragging about how in Syria, most of the country is rubble, and Syria is desperate for reconstruction, but we can prevent that through our sanctions. And also that we own 1/3 of Syria, where the valuable agricultural and oil reserves are, and we can basically keep Syria impoverished to pursue our goal of regime change. And now in your piece, she's there talking with AIPAC and others about how we have to defend Israel, we have to repair its public image, how all these images of dead children are not good for Israel, so we have to do something about that. And this is the agenda that was served in Syria. And I just, in reading this piece and seeing, Dana Stroul make plain what her agenda is, which is promoting Israeli interests, I'm just reminded of all. And again, we don't want to get into a tangent about Syria, but all the self-identified leftists, progressives, adversarial journalists who sided with people like Dana Stroul in Syria under the guise of thinking they were, part of some great revolutionary project, while now Dana Stroul makes plain that her agenda is serving in Israel, which was a motive, not entirely, but it was a motive for the regime change war in Syria as well. So her presence in your piece on AIPAC, bragging about its access to the U.S. government and essentially helping influence U.S. government, is very, very appropriate.
Dana Stroul, or Stroul, is it Stroul?
Stroul. Rhymes with ghoul.
An AIPAC attendee told me she was, talking about how she was rushed to the Pentagon to manage a massive shipment of weapons to Israel as soon as they learned about October 7th. And the first thing she had to do was put her kid in Pentagon daycare. She had to put her kid in daycare in order to slaughter other kids. She was, the Syria Study Group. She's now at the main think tank of the Israel lobby, where the, ideas that AIPAC advances and imposes are conceived. And she was the top ranking civilian on the Middle East, at the Middle East division of the Department of Defense. So she's basically an Israel lobbyist, or an Israeli kind of asset is there. And she was on all the calls, including with the Red Cross, after Israel began using the weapons she helped to authorize and organize from the U.S. stockpiles, U.S. reserves, destroying Gaza City, destroying northern Gaza, just mass slaughter in the first weeks. And the director of the Red Cross for the Middle East told her that they're witnessing atrocities on a grand scale and can't get any aid in. And she actually acknowledged this in leaked emails that were sent to Reuters. She acknowledged the possibility of atrocities and told her bosses. And now here she is again at AIPAC in a kind of secret meeting. There's nothing online that says that she was speaking to AIPAC. And she's blaming the whole thing. I mean, you can go listen to the audio, on Hamas having a deliberate strategy of, in her words, putting children and civilians on the front line. Just absolutely disgusting. And, if there were a Kamala Harris administration, she would be in it at a high level. So this audio might not shock everyone, but I think it's important for the historical record to have it in their voices and to lift the veil. I mean, that's what we always try to do at the Grayzone, is to just provide people with an inside look at how imperial policy is made. Not just doing commentary and editorials and polemics like we do here. So Aaron, you mentioned Syria, that Syria has basically been destroyed as a country. Its destruction was cheered on as liberation by self-professed leftists like Owen Jones and Mehdi Hassan, journalists who attacked us like Murtaza Hussein cheered this on, and Syria's gone. It's not even a country anymore, to the delight of Israel. And now Israel and Turkey are meeting in Azerbaijan for a new Sykes-Picot. This is Clash Report, which is, I think, run by the Turkish state. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, met with Syria's president, Ahmed al-Shara, aka Mohammed al-Jolani, at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. And so they're meeting in this country, Azerbaijan, which has good relations with Turkey. They teamed up to destroy the Armenians and slaughter them in Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as Artsakh. And Azerbaijan has great relations with Israel, is kind of a base of Israeli power projection. So they're mediating how Syria will be divvied up. And Israel has been attacking Syrian positions, putatively Syrian, like the T4 base, or what's left of the T4 air base near Palmyra. Totally destroyed that air base because Turkey was beginning to bring in materiel and supplies for the new Turkish-backed Syrian government of al-Shara. Where are the Syrian people in all this? Where's the issue of Palestine in this? Where's the concept of resistance in this? Nowhere. So that's what's been done to Syria. And all the people who attacked us over the years and who cheered this process on are really nowhere to be found. Or you have to go to I don't know. I'm not even going to say it. I had a great joke, but I'm just not going to say
it. Always wise. Always wise. You've had enough jokes in your record that have gotten you plenty of trouble. So
I just don't want to get in trouble with you because you're like responsible for everything I say because you're there. So I'm fine. But anyway.
Well,
is there any hope for Syria, Aaron?
Well, they just announced a new government, right? And again, all the top portfolios, security go to people in Jolani's inner circle, basically people who all come out of his Al-Qaeda offshoot. So that's the diversity-friendly new Syrian government that we kept hearing so much about, where it's basically Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but just now at a national level. And meanwhile, there's still the leftover issue of hey, remember all those chemical weapons attacks we kept hearing that Assad was carrying out? Well, where are the chemical weapons? If Assad was supposedly still carrying out chemical weapons attacks, where are his chemical weapons stockpiles? And it's been about 4 months since he's been gone, and there's no trace of any of these chemical weapons stockpiles. But the governments that waged the dirty war and used these chemical weapons allegations to push regime change, just like they used fake Iraq WMDs to push regime change in Iraq, they're still pushing this narrative. And so here's the British government recently marking the 7th anniversary of the Duma incident, which, as we know from leaked OPCW documents, was staged by insurgents on the ground. But they say with Assad gone, the UK is still working with its partners and the OPCW to safely rid Syria of Assad's remaining chemical weapons program. Well, where is Assad's remaining chemical weapons program? The New York Times recently had an article saying that that official or the inspectors from the OPCW believe there's over 100 sites remaining of chemical weapons. Well, where are they? They haven't found a single one yet. So there's two possibilities. Either in 4 months of looking, they haven't been able to find one of these chemical weapons sites, or there are no chemical weapons sites because Syria got rid of its chemical weapons program under OPCW supervision more than a decade ago when the Obama administration and Russia brokered a deal after the Ghouta incident. And who do they have now in the new government as a minister? Is the head of the White Helmets, Raed Saleh.
Right, Saleh.
Yeah. So the guy whose group was involved in staging chemical weapons incidents like in Duma, we know that the hospital scene in Duma was staged by the White Helmets. Even people who support the official narrative now acknowledge that the White Helmets staged the hospital scene. He's now in the new government. So what I suspect is his portfolio will entail helping to cover up for this fraud and maybe magically discovering brand new chemical weapon sites that have previously gone somehow undetected inside of Syria, just to keep this up. Because again, this fraud is too big to fail. This was used by the US and UK to wage airstrikes on Syria, justify murderous sanctions on Syria, and to keep the regime change campaign going. If you read any account of Syria in recent years, you always have to say Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, and therefore he has to go. Just as Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, therefore he has to go. It's the exact same Iraq WMD playbook. And because it's too big to fail, they have to keep it going. And it'll be really interesting to see how they try to do that in the absence of any actual chemical weapon sites, because I think all of them are actually gone, because I think Syria actually got rid of its chemical weapons program.
Yeah. It would be there. It would be, can they sniff a backpack to find them? I mean, can we send in a CNN correspondent to sniff a backpack? Where are the mass graves? And what's happening in Syrian prisons now? Are they have they adopted reparative justice policies? Are they treating prisoners well now? Are they getting yoga?
Yeah, and where's I mean, but seriously, like, where's the justice for the massacres that just happened, and the whole world just yawned as thousands of people, most of them Alawite, were just massacred by sectarian insurgents tied to, by sectarian militias. They're not insurgents anymore, I guess, because they're government sanctioned, tied to the new government. We just had a wholesale slaughter of people in Syria because they're from the Alawite sect and other minorities.
It's continuing today, like right now.
Continuing. Yeah, and everyone just shrugs. Everyone just shrugs. You know,
maybe tens of thousands were killed. Thousands were certainly killed, slaughtered in their homes just for being Alawite. And everybody shrugged. The international community of all the countries that voted for the Ukraine proxy war at the UN just shrugged. Clarissa Ward isn't going to come storming into Damascus for this one. She has to like find fake people in prisons and, you know, has to be led around by Western intelligence. She can't just come in on her own and do an unsanctioned, unofficial independent investigation into what outside of Gaza, I think, would be the worst human rights abuse in the world. Josh Landis is someone, you know, who's been documenting this very well, I think. If anyone wants to follow an account that's documenting the genocidal slaughter of Alawites, Landis is very good. There's another account, I think it's called Ostensible Oyster. There's Alawite Defense League. Just a few resources to follow what's taking place, which the media just treated like a footnote, Western media. It's outrageous. It's just outrageous that all of this is in the rearview mirror. I really think there needs to be a documentary, at least, about the OPCW PSYOP. It's so rich for a documentary. I just wonder who can get that done.
Well, you know, I have a list of things I want to do. That's certainly on there. And there's actually a new book out by one of the OPCW whistleblowers, Ian Henderson. He's just recently published a book that came out. It's available, I think, now for purchase. And I think there'll be a lot more coming on that. So, yeah, but I agree. It's good material. It's really good material. It's a story that's still unfolding.
Yeah, I think it will be called The Inspectors, and it's just based around interviews with Henderson, Inspector B. Mm-hmm. You know, you would be a voice, and just because it really, it's about everything that we're subjected to. It's about every PSYOP, and it's about the United States taking control of an international body and turning it into a propaganda mechanism of war. And I'm really worried in this narrow time frame that Israel believes it has to get the U.S. to attack Iran, that we could witness another false flag event. I believe that looking back at the bombing of a Jewish community center in Argentina which Israel blamed on Hezbollah, but which was very likely targeted by far-right forces in Argentina. Israel would like nothing more than that right now, which they could blame on Iran. And so we need to be we need to have our critical faculties on alert. So I think it's important to get that made. Meanwhile, we have, I think, 2 more good segments teed up. Should we talk about the Israeli censorship enforcement brigades in the US, or we could talk about the Pentagon budget?
Well, let's talk about the censorship brigade first, since we've been, on the topic of Israel and all the wonderful things that its apologists are doing. You might as well share the great news of what they're bringing to the U.S., which is a new level of thought police.
Well, remember what Douglas Murray said, that there is no America without a Jewish state controlling Jerusalem. And then consider what they're doing to America in order to preserve the special relationship, which would guarantee them military support for an attack on Iran. They are targeting Iran and the First Amendment at the same time. Is this good for America? And I think that's what is responsible for this post by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, which I call the Israeli censorship enforcers. This is one of the wildest posts by a government agency I've seen. Ideas cannot be illegal in a free. This is about an ICE post, but here's the ICE post, which was deleted. ICE.gov, and this was on X as well. If it crosses the US border illegally, it's our job to stop it. People, money, products, ideas. What ideas are illegal?
Ideas. It seems like they were like a little
America.
It seems like they were like a little bit maybe hesitant, a little bit uncomfortable saying ideas, because you notice how ideas is a little bit like faded out at the bottom. So they didn't want to go full throttle saying that we're trying to like stop ideas coming in, but they still wanted to get the message out. So it's like they're trying to sneak it in, but apparently they caught enough heat that they deleted it. But yeah, I agree. This is one of the most insane government posts I've ever seen. Ideas. Like, this is just out of Orwell. They're not even hiding it.
Well, have you ever listened to Maggot Brain by Funkadelic?
Yeah, of course.
And at the end, George Clinton, you can hear him in concert chanting, think, it ain't illegal yet. That's what it reminded me of. Or the Zappa song, Who Are the Brain Police? It's like, we literally have a brain police, but they're supposed to enforce immigration. And they let the cat out of the bag. There are ideas that they are trying to legislate and criminalize, and they're able to do it through immigration policy. And those are ideas that the Israel lobby does not want circulating because they're dangerous. We're circulating those ideas right now.
And while they deleted that post about, stopping ideas at the border, they have not backed down from this, which is the new announcement from the Department of Homeland Security, DHS to begin screening aliens, by which they mean immigrants, social media activity for anti-Semitism. And what they're announcing here is that basically if you apply to the U.S. on a student visa or for permanent residency on a green card, we're going to look at your social media for quote unquote anti-Semitism. And they define that, of course, as we know from how the Trump administration defines anti-Semitism, that includes criticism of Israel. So basically, if you criticize Israel, you might not be let into the United States. And, notice how other forms of bigotry are still totally fine. So if you're an Islamophobe, if you're a homophobe, if you're a racist, go down the list. That's fine. That's on your social media. That's okay. But if we think you're guilty of anti-Semitism, again, by which they mean criticism of Israel, then you might not be let in. And we were seeing that in action with their ongoing efforts to deport students for criticizing Israel.
Aliens.
If actual aliens came down to the U.S. and observed what was, they might think we're run by Israel. I mean, that would be a very plausible inference to make. But unfortunately, this is our government doing it, saying you can't criticize this foreign apartheid state.
The people with the little hats who like to kill children seem to be in control. This planet is very strange. The politicians must go and look at a wall far away before being elected. This is a strange country. We must return to base, Zygor. People are being charged who are permanent residents now for their thoughts. I mean, it's happening. Right? Mahmoud Khalil, we finally found out what he was charged with. Mahmoud Khalil being the Columbia University former student who was a key negotiator between the students involved in the anti-genocide encampments throughout 2024 and the school administration, had his name basically sent to the Trump administration by one of these Zionist vigilante groups like Beitar or Canary Mission, and he was kidnapped and sent to a privatized ICE facility in Louisiana. And, we were told he's a terrorist, he's Hamas, he's this, now we find out what he is. This is our friend Janine Eunice, after the immigration judge in Mahmoud Khalil's case ordered the government to provide evidence to justify deporting him, and I would add, yanking his green card. This is what they filed. I've been a lawyer for 14 years and a criminal defense lawyer for 9 of those years, and I've never seen anything like this. Totally nebulous, vague allegations about involvement in quote-unquote anti-Semitic protests and quote-unquote disruptive activities without any specific attributions of unlawful activity or even quote-unquote anti-Semitic speech to Khalil himself. In the US and all civilized societies, if government is going to punish someone under the law, it had better provide evidence of specific forms of unlawful activity by the individual it's targeting. Not only has the government entirely failed to do that here, but it's obvious its case is predicated on punishing First Amendment protected speech and protests. And you can look at it. It's like, where's the terrorism? Where's the crime? What did he do? Fosters a hostile environment for Jewish students in the United States. I mean, a group of Jewish students just chained themselves to the fence at Columbia University last week in protest of the genocide and the government imposed censorship of their school, anti-protest policy. But they're not included here.
And also, again, last time in our last stream, I think we played the clip of Marco Rubio in 2022 at CPAC mocking liberals for policing speech and canceling people if they say the wrong thing, and mocking this idea of I don't feel safe if someone says something I don't like that makes me uncomfortable. Well, now Rubio is being that kind of snowflake, but to a way bigger extreme, because he's literally trying to deport people who he says make Zionist students feel unsafe simply because they criticize Israel. And that includes Jewish people who have been taking part in the protests against Israel's mass murder campaign. So this is whatever you want to call it, woke, snowflake culture, as it's, derisively called by people like Rubio. This is that to an infinite level. Now they're literally going to police and deport people for making supporters of Israel feel unsafe and uncomfortable. It's beyond parody. And Janine Eunice, by the way, who's calling this out, the attorney who's Palestinian, she called out censorship by Democrats. She actually challenged it. She actually helped advise
the Supreme Court.
Yeah, she at the Supreme Court, she challenged vaccine mandates, all the excesses of liberal sort of authoritarianism and government coercion. She challenged. And so she actually has been consistent on this issue, but who can say that they've really been consistent on this issue, especially on the right? All those people who mocked government censorship when it was happening under Biden. A group like Fire.org, Fire.org, they're criticizing this to their credit, but that's a very rare exception.
And those Jewish students who chained themselves to the fence, Katie Halper interviewed them. And one by one, she asked, what's your major? And almost all of them said Jewish studies. Like they were very Jewish.
Yeah.
They were like riding in the mitzvah mobile. I mean, you can't question that some of the most the people who are most serious about Jewish identity, Jewish history, Jewish religion in academia are opposed to the genocide. And that's why you see a lot of scholars of anti-Semitism being removed, or Holocaust studies scholars being removed and attacked under this purge, because they know too much. And they want doofuses and clowns and operatives in there. And, you know, if you look at who Trump just appointed as his new anti-Semitism czar, that'll really
crazy.
tell you something about.
This is crazy. Sorry.
Do I have this up? Sorry, I don't have it. His new anti-Semitism czar, I don't know if I'll have time to fully explain who he is, but this is Michael Tracy. Trump's picked for a special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. By the way, why is this position existing with Doge? Like, why is Doge allowing this costly position to exist? Shouldn't this be eliminated as waste and fraud? Like, do we need this? Well, of course. It's a Chabad rabbi from the Chabad cult, a fundraiser and a businessman. He runs a company, I'm annotating this, called Ruscap, which makes water out of air, and is a military contractor, which sends water fountains to the military that supposedly make water out of air. His name is Yehuda Kaplan, whom he met through Miriam Adelson. He is an Adelson operative. Trump's political empowerment of quote-unquote ultra-Orthodox Jewish movements is a unique feature of his recent activities. There's Miriam Adelson, Israeli intelligence asset, Likudnik warlord, Trump, and Yehuda Kaplan. And Kaplan is very influential in the Trump administration. Deborah Lipstadt was a Holocaust scholar who served as anti-Semitism czar under Biden, very Zionist, disgusting figure. But this character doesn't even try to hide it. By the way, he was born in Israel. He's an Israeli. He says the situation to Jews in America is similar to that of Jews in 1930s Germany. And he loves Trump calling out Islamic radical terror and the threat of Iran. I'm not really feeling like I'm in 1930s Germany.
Again, like, not that this matters, like, not that the feelings of, Jewish people like ourselves matter right now, because it's the Palestinians that are being mass murdered. But it's like, if we want to take a second just to look at that, it's so insulting to Jews when you think about it, that you're comparing the plight of Jews today to the plight of Jews during the Nazi Holocaust. You're completely trivializing their experience. My
Nuremberg laws.
Yeah, my great-grandparents were slaughtered in Auschwitz along with millions of people, and you're comparing our plight right now as privileged North American Jews to them. It's so insulting. And of course, I don't want to spend too long being outraged about this, because our feelings don't matter right now. It's Palestinians that are undergoing the current Holocaust. But the fact that they can say this out loud, it shows not only their contempt for Palestinians and Arabs, but also just for Jews and the actual Jewish experience of the Nazi Holocaust. Otherwise, how could they possibly trivialize it in this way? It's so insulting. It's pathetic. But yet it's so popular now. And, Dana Bash was, this is not confined to just like Trump appointees. This is like liberals as well. Dana Bash of CNN also talked about the atmosphere on college campuses being similar to 1930s Germany. So this like self-victimization and this insult to the legacy of the Nazi Holocaust, it's bipartisan. It's widespread. It's not just the like Trump MAGA camp fringe, like Zionist fringe of the MAGA camp. It's also enlightened liberal journalists.
Well, yeah, and if you feel like the Goyim are mad at you, maybe you should stop supporting the self-proclaimed Jewish state that's reenacting the Nazi Holocaust. That might be a good idea. I don't know. Speaking of the Holocaust, the Rebbe, the Moshiach, the Messiah of the Chabad cult, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who's like this holy figure to them, he wasn't just a Holocaust denier. He was kind of a Holocaust supporter. He believed the Holocaust was a good thing and compared it to a limb being amputated. And he placed the blame for the Nazi genocide on Reform Judaism, on Jews not being religious enough. It is clear that evil descends from above, and buried within torment and suffering is a core of exalted spiritual good. It is quite possible that a physical affliction is good for the spirit. This is what he said at Kfar Chabad, which is like a fake city built between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, where a Brooklyn brownstone is created in the midst of historic Palestine to recreate the home that Menachem Schneerson grew up in Brooklyn. I've actually been there. Yeah, the Holocaust was a good thing because it lopped off a disease-ravaged limb of the Jewish people in order to cleanse the Jewish people of its sins.
Oh,
you know, and many of those Jews were in the Socialist Bund, which was a major Jewish organization in Eastern Europe and also the Soviet Union, but all across Eastern Europe, which believed that Zionism was an abomination and resisted Nazism. And, you know, many of them participated in the fight against Nazism. And those are the people that Rabbi Menachem Schneerson condemned. Disgusting figure, disgusting cult. I've been among them. I went to Israel with them through the Birthright Israel program. Not that I knew they were on my trip, but they were like our guides. And the whole point of Chabad is, and they're fun. Like you get drunk with them and like they party, and they do like cool like b-boy style dances. Like it's kind of impressive. And they understand they're really into Kabbalah and numerology, but that's all kind of like a tactic with secular Jews like me, or ostensibly secular, to bring us in to their cult. They are the only Jewish sect that proselytizes, but they proselytize among Jews. And now it appears that they're proselytizing or currying influence and favors within powerful sectors of the international right wing. The Trump administration has a very special relationship with the Chabad cult, as does Javier Milei, who is basically a member of it and I think is converting to Judaism and was recently honored by Chabad in Miami. But here's Trump and Howard Lutnick paying homage to Rabbi Schneerson during back in October. They're making a pilgrimage to Schneerson. I've never seen an American president do this. And this is like a cult-like figure. They believe he's the Messiah who will come back to earth and establish a holy reign, and who believes that Gentiles are subhuman. That's Howard Lutnick from Cantor Fitzgerald to Trump's right. I mean, this is like something out of an anti-Semitic fantasy. And you wonder why if anti-Semitism is rising, you wonder why. Like, this is not someone that a president should be praying to. And the Chabad cult also helped Ivanka Trump convert to Orthodox Judaism in order to marry Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. I think that's the case. And look at what Donald Trump just did. He declared a national day of education to honor the Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson. He just did this on April 9th. He signed it into law with Chabad cultists all around him. This is like one of the stories the media isn't telling about the Trump administration, is how deeply penetrated it is by Chabad. and how weird and fascistic this cult is. Like, this is the cult responsible for the book Torat HaMelech, which was distributed within the Israeli military, which declares that the new way of fighting war, the new ethics for the Israeli military, should be based on religious law, which holds that if anyone is deemed a threat to the Jewish people, even as a child, they should be killed. And the book was actually unofficially banned by the Israeli General Security Services. I did a documentary on this, a short one. It's online. Because I went to an event where some of the chief state-funded rabbis in Israel got up and defended the book. And the two rabbis, one of them is named Yitzhak Ginsburg from the most extreme yeshiva in the Yitzhar settlement north of Nablus, were called in for shin bet interrogations. And they just basically said, we're not coming, and nothing happened. But they come from Chabad. Chabad is very influential in the settlements. It is like the most extreme sect of ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And it's got huge influence in the Trump administration, which, should make us concerned about every Trump policy relating to the region, including war on Iran, censorship, attacks on the First Amendment.
Well, listen, on that topic of war with Iran, this has been a very bleak stream. So I want to give people.
It's always bleak. Like the last ones have all been bleak. I'm like,
but I just want to show. I want to show one thing. I'm just showing people this. This just came up from Axios. Tulsi Gabbard installs Iran dove to prepare Trump's intel briefing. And what the story is about is that basically Tulsi Gabbard's won out in this sort of struggle to see, in terms of who's going to be briefing Trump on Iran. It's actually someone who does not favor war with Iran. So now, does Trump care about what he's briefed in his intel briefing? Probably not. But I'm just trying to show people, at least there's some divergence internally in the White House over war with Iran. And this is a sign that Tulsi Gabbard is on the side of those who don't want war with Iran, and to the point where someone in this position is briefing Trump who does not want war with Iran. So that's just something positive, or potentially positive. At least it shows that not everybody is on board with the Israeli agenda inside the White House.
Yeah. There are others who are controversial and came under attack by Israel lobbyists. And, we saw some neocons ousted, like Doug Feith's son, David Feith, thanks to the ultra-Zionist intervention of Laura Loomer, or the intervention of ultra-Zionist Laura Loomer.
Yeah.
But then, I never thought I'd be grateful for someone getting loomered, but
Yeah, and then of course, what happened when Tulsi Gabbard was rumored to be considering Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis for a top position as her deputy? The Israel lobby revolted and made sure he wasn't hired. So it's true. Like it goes all ways. It goes both ways.
I mean, if you watch Trump's brief press conference with Netanyahu, he's not listening to any briefings. He's just like running his mouth. I just put in the chat a link to my video report on Torat HaMelech from Jerusalem. It's actually, it's also a chapter in my book, Goliath. And the title is How to Kill Goyim and Influence People. That's really what the book is about. I went to get a copy of it. I mean, it was in Hebrew, but I just wanted to find a copy of it at the only bookstore in Jerusalem that sold it. And they had a giant picture over the top of the bookstore in the center of Jerusalem, honoring a picture of Jonathan Pollard.
Oh, and for those who don't know who Jonathan Pollard is, the Israeli spy who basically stole U.S. nuclear secrets, spying on behalf of Israel.
He was a Navy analyst who was an American.
Committed treason, and then it became like the cause célèbre inside Zionist circles to get him free. I remember like growing up, like at my Zionist youth camp that I went to, which is another story. You know, we'd have to like, there were debates about like whether or not Jonathan Pollard was a hero or not, and there was a big push to like make him a hero. And then eventually he did get freed, right? I forgot who it was under. Was it under like was it under Trump that he got freed, or under Clinton? Finally, he was freed and then sent to Israel.
Yeah. And guess how he got to Israel?
How?
Sheldon Adelson flew him on his personal jet.
Oh, there we go.
The top donor of Donald Trump flew the spy who gave up major U.S. intelligence secrets to Israel, which apparently cost the U.S. billions in trade secrets and endangered the lives of hundreds of confidential operatives.
Yeah. Who cares? He did it for Israel, so, you know, all's forgiven. And,
he's a settler now, and he has a YouTube channel. He's like a podcaster now.
I'm sure he's living a great life on a stolen Palestinian land. Man, oh man.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really think I should write a book about I wanted to start it at October 7th, but maybe just the Trump administration, just the level of, I don't know if there's like a 3-letter acronym to explain it, but like the level of Israeli control over it could make a good book if I could find the time. But I'm like, you know, I'm very proud of the week we had at the Grayzone the last week, just pumping out so much reporting, raw reporting and analysis, and being able to do this stream that I haven't found the time. And we've got some more in the pipeline. Some incredible stuff from Kit Clarenberg and Jeremy Lafredo. Do you want to do the Pentagon budget?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's high. The Pentagon budget is so high it could kiss the sky. Only Red Man could possibly describe the Pentagon budget. Hi, I'm Ari Melber. Welcome to the beat.
Ari would never dare, criticize the Pentagon budget. So you know, save crowd. Yeah, like his hip hop references are for like, you know, praising what's his name, Jack Smith or Robert Mueller. You know, not for actually social commentary.
As MOP said, as Capone Noriega said, shot. And that's why you need to get vaccinated, folks.
We could do a whole show of like fake Ari Melber hip hop references to promote Blue and On policies. That's really funny. All right, well, let's hear Trump. Here he is, Trump. He's with Netanyahu. He's got a really special announcement to make.
We have great things happening with our military. We also essentially approved a budget, which is in the facility, you'll like to hear this, of $1 trillion, $1 trillion. And nobody's seen anything like it. We have to build our military, and we're very cost conscious, but the military is something that we have to build, and we have to be strong because you got a lot of bad forces out there now. So we're going to be approving a budget.
There's bad guys.
I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military. We have great. There's
a lot of bad forces,
and this comes just like a month after Trump said this about the military budget.
First meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia, and I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half, and we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
So Trump goes from saying, I want to cut the military budget in half, and that was right after he took office. That was like in his first weeks in office, to now saying, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to have $1 trillion Pentagon budget. It's the biggest one ever, but don't worry, we're very cost efficient. So, all that Doge stuff, you don't worry, we're going to keep an eye on it, even though, of course, the Pentagon can't pass an audit. And here's Pete Hegseth, Trump's defense secretary. He's so excited about this. He's just so giddy. He says of Trump, he says, thank you, Mr. President. Coming soon, the first $1 trillion Pentagon budget. President Trump is rebuilding our military and fast. P.S. We intend to spend every dollar wisely on lethality and readiness. So don't worry, everybody. The Pentagon, which can't pass an audit, is going to get $1 trillion, but every single dollar will be spent wisely on killing more innocent civilians, whether it's in Gaza or Yemen or anywhere else that Pete Hegseth wants. I mean, It's just such a farce. It's such a farce. And this is Trump, who campaigned against endless war, who's talked before about the military-industrial complex. He's criticized it. He's called it out, actually. This is him in 2019 when he was in office the first time. And listen to what he said back then about the military-industrial complex in Washington.
You can reassure people you're not looking for some kind of conflict in Iran. And
well, I'm the one that talks about these wars that are 19 years and people are just there. And don't kid yourself, you do have a military-industrial complex. They do like war. You know, in Syria with the caliphate. So I wipe out 100% of the caliphate. That doesn't mean you're not going to have these crazy people going around blowing up stores and blowing up things. These are seriously ill people. I don't want to say, oh, they're wiped out, you know, ISIS. But I wiped out 100% of the caliphate. I say I want to bring our troops back home. The place went crazy. They want to keep it. You have people here in Washington. They never want to leave. I say, you know what I'll do? I'll leave a couple of hundred soldiers behind. But if it was up to them, they'd bring thousands of soldiers in. Someday people will explain it.
Well, this is an example.
You do have a group, and they call it the military-industrial complex. They never want to leave. They always want to fight. No, I don't want to fight. But
there you go. He's calling out the military-industrial complex, but now here he is bragging about how he's giving the military-industrial complex its biggest Pentagon budget ever.
Yeah. He's kind of like a Democrat. They run to the left and they govern to the right.
100%. 100%. That's exactly what it is.
Trump came in talking about ending nuclear modernization efforts, which would be a great way to reduce the Pentagon budget. One of the best ways to reduce waste and put money in the American economy. Trillions of dollars of assets could come out of that long term. But, you know, he's busting the budget, and it's going to be used on lethality. I love how Pete Hegseth always uses that term, lethality. It's like how academics say coloniality and they put ality on the end of common words so they sound smart. He sounds kind of like a woke academic. He's talking about what they're doing in Yemen, where they're just killing tons of civilians in a so far failed war. Because they have $1 trillion budget. What you have to basically cook up phony wars if you're going to justify that budget. But most of the money is, as always, is just going to go to contractors, and there will be no transparency. You don't see the big balls and the Doge gang running up in the Pentagon conducting audits. They're not allowed.
No.
Not happening. They're not going to go into even the Pentagon daycare center. They're not going to cut that. They just are like removing the entire Department of Agriculture, Department of Education. Pentagon's off limits.
But if Trump ends up running for a third term, as he's been talking about, I've no doubt he'll go back to talking about the military-industrial complex and campaigning against endless war and reining in the deep state and all these things. You know, after he tries to raise the Pentagon budget to $1 trillion. It's too bad because I don't think his base is behind this. It's not what most people voted for. I think he had a lot of appeal because he was the only candidate over multiple cycles talking about the need to stop these endless wars and stop all this waste on the military. I mean, he talked about it, but as he's showing again and again and again, it's a con. It's just a con. And it's a betrayal of his voters. But unfortunately, his voters, it's not really a movement. They got organized for January 6th. but to storm the Capitol, but otherwise, it's not an actual movement that's organized around issues. It's a cult of personality, and that's why he can get away with stuff like this.
I mean, it's just becoming clear to me, probably not to Trump's base and the Trump cultists, but it's becoming clear to me that they voted for him on the basis of a lot of those promises, hoping American jobs would come back. Many of them didn't want to be involved in costly proxy wars like Ukraine, and they're just getting more war, and they're getting a higher Pentagon budget, and they're getting economically weaker, and they're getting more inflation, and their Social Security and Medicare is now being threatened by a mega billionaire who is a transhumanist who wants to chip our brains. I thought they were against the fourth industrial revolution. He's at the forefront of it. They are getting poorer. They are getting censored. Well, they're not getting censored. Censorship is just being taken from what Biden was doing to another level. On a material basis, Trump's base, including the billionaire capitalist class that supported him, isn't getting anything so far.
Yeah.
Maybe I guess some weapons contractors are getting something. They're not getting anything. What they're getting is a passion play, a digital online passion play directed against the members of the underclass that they have been instructed to hate, particularly migrants. And it's being played out in a weird pornographic fashion to satiate their aggressive hatred of, and also to deflect anger from their real class enemies, those among the Trump base who are workers and not billionaires. This is what they're getting. They're getting this kind of, vaguely pornographic theater from Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary.
I also want everybody to know, if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use. I also want everybody to know.
Like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, and she's also wearing she's also wearing a $50,000 watch in that photo op at a gulag.
She's wearing a $50,000 watch. She just had her hair run through curlers, or, she's all done up in front of MS-13 members at it's worse than a gulag. It's like a black site in El Salvador, where the Trump administration has sent people who immigrated to the U.S. legally supposedly by mistake, and refusing court orders to allow them to come back. But this is the kind of theater that Trump's base is getting in place of actual material benefits that Trump promised. And they're going for it. Kristi Noem just went on raids of gang members' homes and arrested them in Phoenix with Chaya Raichik, libs of TikTok, another Chabad cultist, by the way. And she deputized a right-wing Twitter influencer to arrest gang members. That's what they're getting. There aren't any mass deportations, by the way. That's not happening either. So they're just getting a fantasy world to deflect and distract them from their real class enemies. And I mean, what the hell this is sick. It looks like the cover of a fascist 90s bukkake movie, that you would pick up on VHS. Like, what the hell is going through their minds, or her mind? Well, I just said what's going through their minds.
Well, and on the Democratic side, the one point I wanted to make, and then I have to jump off, is the Democratic side. What are they offering people as an alternative? I mean, yeah, they're critical on some of these issues, but look at Cory Booker's recent 25-hour rant before Congress. Did he mention Gaza once? Did he mention war profiteering, Trump continuing endless wars? No, because speaking of the Chabad cult, he's also compromised by them too. I mean, he takes instructions from Rabbi Shmuley, right? Like, that's like a spiritual advisor. And
Cory Booker?
Cory Booker, yeah.
Well, they no longer talk because Shmuley even alienated Cory Booker.
Oh, okay, my bad. Well, but they have ties, right? They go back.
Yes, that helped launch Cory Booker's career.
Yeah, and Cory Booker takes a lot of money from AIPAC. And Bernie Sanders Bernie Sanders has been doing tours, and he's talking about Medicaid, and that's good. But when it comes to, a Democrat, a progressive voice who could tap into anti-war sentiment, when Trump recently announced that he wanted to make peace with Russia, Bernie Sanders made a video calling this a sad day, calling this a sad day for America. So that's like, so progressives are offering nothing consistent that can channel the populist rage that Trump has tapped into. So we have either like a fake populist like Trump, or we have inconsistent populists like Bernie Sanders, who will take the side of the pro-war establishment on these vital issues like the Ukraine proxy war. So we have no consistency from anyone, and that works to Trump's advantage because Trump at least has a cult of personality around him that people like being a part of. Well,
yeah, and Trump has so far been unable to bring the factory that produces Shmuley's dildos stateside, which is a real loss for the American worker. But just, I know you have to go on that point, and in closing, on the Democratic side, it's not just the leadership. There's a giant con taking place where those who oppose Donald Trump actually share many of the same, they share some of the same sense of outrage as Trump because they are being economically shafted too, and their union members and their workers. They're directing it at Trump and billionaire-backed push organizations, pressure groups like Move On and Indivisible are trying to channel that anger into fake protests that will lead them back into the same Democratic Party that helped create this crisis. And that's what the mass hands-off protests were about. And part of their messaging was hands off NATO. But there was nothing in their messaging about hands off Gaza. These were not rallies that would allow anything relating to the Holocaust of our time, because those Democrats, those consultants, they actually blame the Palestine Solidarity Movement for Kamala's loss and hold them in deep contempt. So they had to hold little like separate rallies, and then maybe like someone would slip in to the Democrat rallies with a Palestine flag. But those rallies are also designed to deflect and divert people's legitimate anger against their true class enemies into supporting the problem, which is the duopoly, the corporate-run duopoly. And Trump is part of it. It's just that we're at a state of imperial decline where Trump, a figure like Trump, had to be deployed, who seemed more credible and who would promise peace and who would promise bringing jobs back and had his background as The Apprentice, sort of an actor. That's Trump's role right now. And I think it's being exposed pretty rapidly. Let's see how much damage he can do before, his base, members of his base start to walk away. It's really up to them at this point to start putting pressure on him before he bombs Iran and destroys the economy or what's left of it. So on that note, I mentioned there was an election in Ecuador on Sunday. Oscar Leon, who's our videographer and does a video editor and does a lot of great reporting on Latin America, has an important piece up at the Grayzone about Daniel Noboa, the cartel-tied leader of Ecuador who's running for re-election. And I wanted to feature him, an interview with him, but I think we're going to have to do a post-game review with Oscar of the election. But it's actually a fascinating scenario where you have a giant corporation tied to narco cartels running a country and seeking to steal an election against a Ecuadorian nationalist who's a social democrat in Luisa Gonzalez. So look at something to pay attention to. And we'll have a lot more.
I wanted to make one announcement. If you're in New York City, this just was just announced. Oops, sorry. On May 5th, there'll be an event featuring Gabor Mate, Chris Hedges, Palestine, the moral issue of our time. That's on Monday, May 5th at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. All proceeds will benefit the Middle East Children's Alliance. I might say a few words. I'll be there, and it'll be a great event. And
do you know those guys?
I do know those guys. Yeah. I've interviewed both of them. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I would go if I were there.
Well, if you're around, then it'll be a good one. And the tickets are, you can see the link, meccaxnyc.eventbrite.com. And tickets will be going fast. So if you're around New York City, then try to make it.
Cool. Yeah. And correct. It is the moral issue of our time. It should be easy. And I think more and more people are seeing it than ever before. If Pew polls are to believe, for the first time, a majority of Americans, according to a new Pew poll, hold a negative view of Israel. While we'd like to take credit for that, I think that the credit goes to reality. And with that, we'll see you all next week. Thanks, Aaron, for joining us as always. And thank you all for subscribing to the Grayzone, sign up to our Substack, and support any way you see fit. Peace.
Peace.